we are going to discuss several techniques for writing a successful speech. The art of rhetoric or oratory is extremely ancient and goes back as far as the time of Confucius. In fact, Aristotle defined rhetoric as the power to use persuasiveness. So anytime that we are speaking in general with another person or we're giving a speech presentation, we are trying to persuade the audience, we're trying to persuade the other person to do something. Okay? So that definition of the power to use persuasiveness applies not only back when Aristotle defined it, but it also is very accurate today. So there are 6 techniques that we're going to discuss. One is research. 2 is then to assemble the speech in a logical order so that you have an introduction, you have a body, you have a conclusion. Number 3 is to use devices of rhetoric. Number 4, you're going to have to memorize most of your speech, and we'll go into that. 5 is practice using gestures, facial expression, and modulating your voice up and down when it's important. You don't want to put your audience asleep. And then finally is the appropriateness of language. You need to use the appropriate language suitable for the occasion and for the audience. So let's look at number 1. Prepare thoroughly. You need to prepare. You need to know what you're talking about. We need to remember that your success in this class or in your profession is governed by your attention to detail. There is no substitute for thorough preparation. If you present a rhetorical argument, you must know and understand the persuasive argument. If you cite authorities to support your argument, it is essential that you have read the authorities of which you speak and that you use narrative signal phrases. Without using narrative signal phrases, your audience will question your credibility. So it's very, very important. And number 2, we need to speak slowly and clearly. Speaking slowly and clearly with good punctuation of your words is one of the most important methods. Work on your voice modulation so that your audience stays awake. You want to make sure your words reach the back rows. So think about your audience. How important is listening to not only yourself, but also to your audience? Listening can be found on chapter 4 in our text, and audience analysis can be found on chapter 5. I would suggest that you review both of those chapters. And I believe that there is a quiz on them as well. Number 3, speak to your audience and not at them. It's important to have a conversation with the audience. A conversation makes your audience feel included. Think about the differences that you feel when someone speaks with or to you instead of at you. Because most speech presentations are intended to persuade, inclusive language is an important rhetorical device. A speaker must create a sense of community. Use pronouns such as we or us and they and them to create the sense of community. The program I does not do that. I forces the attention away from your audience and back to you, and that is not a good technique. Keep the use of I to a very minimum. Use I only where you need a distinction between you and your audience. A good example is John Kennedy's inaugural address. He used we, us, and our 28 times and the pronoun I only once. So remember that. Another example is that of a defense attorney who said this: members of the jury, we are all men and women of the world. We all have memories of walking up to someone on the street thinking we recognize them, and then realizing at the last minute, perhaps even after we have greeted them, that it isn't Fred after all. We have made a mistake identifying each, even someone we thought we knew, even at close range, and even in broad daylight. If you remember this, and if you use your common sense and your knowledge of how the real world works, how can we possibly be sure that the appropriated identification of my client is correct? The statement uses you only when this is essential and establishes common ground by drawing on shared experiences. Remember, maintain eye contact as well. Eliminate, number 4 is to eliminate nonsense words. An interjection is not part of the speech. It is a noisy utterance like the cry of an animal. Do not use words such as like or phrases such as, if you see what I mean, as I said, you know what I mean, or you know. These words and phrases are common in normal everyday speech, but eliminate them in your speech presentations. Mark Twain said, the right word may be effective, but no word was ever as effective as a good pause. So you need to make use of silence. Sometimes it gives the audience an opportunity to reflect on what you have just said so that they understand the importance. Any speech is much better when silence is used. The periods of time between phrases and sentences and paragraphs in a speech are not merely gaps. They are the tools that every speaker needs to use. So don't fill these silent gaps with utterances like oh, and what, nothing of that nature. Keep it silence. Number 6 is think in complete sentences. Train yourself to speak in sentences. One of the benefits for using the academic sentence outline, which is we abbreviate as ASO, is to help you think in complete sentences. You need to memorize your speech as best you can so you have a normal understanding of what direction the speech is supposed to take. In normal circumstances, the speaker has not planned down to the last word. This is another reason for speaking slowly. Memorize your speech. Speaking slowly will give you time to compose each phrase before uttering it. However, if you compose only phrases and not full sentences, sooner or later you will come to a point where you have started a sentence and cannot work out how to end it. You will then be forced to a choice between a clumsy ending, starting again, or leaving the sentence unfinished. And none of those will satisfy the audience. And it also creates the impression you give will be a one of indecision. So the impression that you give will be one of indecision or uncertainty. Another common error which can be avoided by thinking in complete sentences, is a tendency to be sidetracked in the middle of one sentence into starting another. In general, the result of doing this is that the original sentence is never completed, which ruins both the flow of the speech and the ability of the audience to understand what is being said. So, number 7 is appropriate language. If you talk to a person in a language that one understands, the words go to the person's head. If you talk to the audience in a language that is one's own language, those words go, as Nelson Mandela stated, to one's heart. You need to remember to adjust your language to make it suitable for one's subject and one's audience. This applies both to the complexity of the vocabulary. You don't want to talk above their heads, but you don't want to use vocabulary that speaks below their intellectual level. The complexity of vocabulary being is is similar to the emotional content of the word. So the complexity of vocabulary will bring some emotion to your audience. If it's above what they understand, they turn you off. If it's below, they think that you're speaking to a child, and it will turn you off. It turn them off. How about using appropriate body language? Okay, we've got to get a couple things to remember. First, think about how to physically address your audience. Adapt a stance facing your audience with your feet slightly apart and your weight evenly distributed, and stand upright. This gives an appearance of confidence and authority, of credibility. Next, keep your eyes on your audience. You may have difficulty with this, so fix on something at the back of the room that is just above the head of your audience. Okay? Eye contact with your audience, or eye contact and your audience is thinking that you're looking at them, is very important. Now, with eye contact, you can see the faces of your audience, and you need to be able to read the reaction of your audience. Read the faces of your audience. These faces are a picture of their mind, and the eyes are the interpreter of your audience's thoughts and reactions to what is being said. An audience's eyes tell you if they are listening. Chapter 4 is all about listening in our text. Or if they listening, or are they just sleeping with their eyes open? Think about that. You don't want the latter. And, and we need to remember the KISS method. Keep it short and simple. One of the standard techniques of rhetoric is to keep your sentences short and simple. But the speech overall should be as short as is possible, consistent with covering all the necessary points adequately. Do not use repetition other than for value, and unnecessary words need to be avoided. So, one of the interesting things about nerves is that Mark Twain said that there are only two types of speakers that exist in the world: the nervous ones and the liars. And his idea is that every speaker in public is, or at least should be, nervous. Nervousness in a capable speaker is not to be feared. It gives the speaker an adrenaline rush, which speeds up the thought process and sharpens the reaction. It is the same as in an athletic competition. An athlete or a speaker needs adrenaline, but we need to learn to manage it. And finally, remember the 6 points. Research your topic, assemble the sections, use the devices of rhetoric, memorize your speech, practice using gestures, facial expressions, and modulation of your voice, and make sure that your language is appropriate and suitable for the occasion and the audience. Thank you.